But we were trying to figure out how we would have Carson Valley's first annual Tomato Fest at this event. And we had to set up because it takes some prep. So the tomatoes are in the Full Circle Compost booth, and the information is here. But just so you guys don't go hungry, I bought some tomatoes over here, sliced them up. We're going to pass them around. Looks like you've all been stuck with the Feed Your Food sticker. Yeah? Somebody isn't wearing it.
Literally.
Literally, yes, yes, exactly. So anyway, my name is Craig Witt. I own a company called Full Circle Compost. I'm a native to Carson Valley. I have been living here my entire life, and yes, I am still very frustrated with the weather. What they say about the weather on this side of the Sierras is that if you don't like the weather right now, just wait a minute. And so like right now I'm feeling the breeze that we weren't supposed to get. But actually it feels pretty good, because I probably should take my sweatshirt off. But this morning I was so excited because it was only 34 degrees at my house. That's a whole lot better than 30 degrees, which was the morning before. So I've got these giant 7-foot tall tomatoes, and do I have a photo showing you one of those? I have one that looks kind of like this, grown right at my back porch, and it stays a little warmer up against the house. This is last year's. That reminds me of the farm. You know, speaking of that, chicken poop is one of your best fertilizers that you can get. It's very concentrated, but it's a good one. Yeah, and for those of you that don't know that critter or that sound, that's chicken. So anyway, this is a Super Sweet 100. Last year, I always grow 2 tomatoes right at the entrance to my back door. Call them backdoor tomato, because every time you walk in the door, you can pick one off. This year I grew, in place of this one, I grew a black cherry tomato. And I diced one up here. It's on this board. I'll pass it around in a minute. You go to the booth. It's very flavorful, much different than a Super Sweet 100. However, I think I might go back to the Super Sweet 100. I lost count at 2,000 tomatoes off the Super Sweet 100. I'm at about 250 or so right now with the black cherry. The black cherry is more complex flavor, so you need to kind of like sit down on your porch and take your time. You can't just pop it in your mouth. You got to take your time with the black cherry there. Anyway, the black cherry is about another 3 feet taller than this. You actually, to pick the ones I picked to bring here this morning, I had to get the step ladder. So there is kind of a bad side to growing them that tall, because you know it's like tree fruit now. You want to grow miniatures so that you don't have to have a lot. Yeah. So what I want to talk about or share real quickly is how you end up being able to grow things. Period, because our weather is very challenging here. All of Carson Valley, there's like 4 different microclimates here. Genoa has its own little unique thing going on. Foothill and the upper edges of the valley tend to be warmer by up to 30 days. We lived on a farm by the airport my whole life. Bought a house in town, thought, boy, it's always warm in town. Went to town, I bought a house where it's colder than anywhere else in the valley, I think. 5-degree temperature change between my backyard and the highway 395 going through town, and it's only maybe 1/8 of a mile. So it's all about where the frost settles. And so I think a new thing that we need to force the real estate industry to do is to give you a documented temperature history when you come here to, because you guys are in Willow, we call that Willow Creek. And have you frozen yet? Frosted? Yeah, but little frost, but not killing everything. Yeah. Yeah, so some folks haven't had that. So anyway, when you're growing tender annuals, which are what tomatoes are considered to be, you've got to have a program to do it. What they wanted me to talk about a little bit was about the soil and the soils in Carson Valley. There's a large soils map done by the Soil Conservation District. You can go down to the Soil Conservation District. You can actually get this soils map. All of the United States has been mapped, and they categorize the soils. And I think it's a neat thing to do. It doesn't tell you everything about the soil that you need to know. So I just happened to bring a soil sample along. If you wouldn't mind passing those out, I better keep one. Okay, thank you. So what we're going to look at, this just happens to be some soil that was accumulated by the Nature Conservancy between Muller Lane and Genoa Lane. And so it would be what's considered to be Central Valley pasture land. Now, as a native here, I think it's worthwhile to understand that if you look at some of the history of Carson Valley, my grandfather and his predecessors weren't blessed with as much technology as we have, but I think they had more common sense. We will find that most of the productive ag ground is not on what we would call the west side of 395, and that's more pasture ground. And the biggest productive ag ground was part of the original Dangberg farm, and they had tree fruit, and they actually grew and produced all of the food that was used in Virginia City and Bodie. So the only reason really I think we're here is because they found gold in those two locations, and that created a population base that was there mining, and they were hungry. And last time I checked, we all need to eat eventually. You know, some of us maybe need to stop eating. But so anyway, what I found out is that our farm was a little different than some of the other farms. And then I went to school, got a university degree, was told that basically I had a deficiency of some kind of chemical fertilizer. And so I brought home that knowledge and used all those chemical fertilizers. And production went up a little bit, but the lifespan of the crops that I was growing went down. We were raising forage for milk cows. My grandfather had 12-year-old stands of alfalfa. Your biggest cost is to establish the stand. It's kind of like putting your lawn in. It's kind of, it's a lot of work to get it started. And our lifespan went down to 4 years. So every 4 years I was replacing that crop. So sustainable, no. High yield, yeah. What was the quality? So real quick, we'll go through this, because these soil samples are kind of boring. But first of all, I found a lab that speaks the language of a plant. Now, if we go to a laboratory, for instance, an analogy would be if my toe hurts. In fact, it's kind of funny. I tried it. I have ringing in this left ear right now, and I went to the dentist to have a tooth work done, and I asked him to look at my ear. I go, "Can you look at my ear? My ear's ringing." And he goes, "No." And I said, "Well, usually you take my blood pressure. Can you take, because they take your blood pressure at the dentist, and so there's this crossover." And I go, "Well, I had my chiropractor look in my ear, So anyway, I had to go to the ear doctor. So the point is you got to go to the right doctor. We're usually, as people, we're smart enough. If your toe hurts, you go to the podiatrist, not the dentist. I mean, I'm always trying to save a buck here or there. Some of us, we just don't go, And I don't know if that's a good answer either. So some of us are trying to garden in Carson Valley, and we just don't go anywhere to get any information other than Home Depot and Lowe's, and after all, Lowe's knows, so I guess that's all you need to know. Most of the time, sometime people come to us at Full Circle because we seem to get pretty good results. The reason we get good results is documented on this piece of paper. First, find a lab that speaks plant language. Plants don't care what I speak. I mean, I talk to my plants and I say all kinds of nice things to them in different languages. But the point being is that if the laboratory information doesn't make sense to a plant, then you aren't going to be seeing any kind of satisfied plants. You aren't going to be able to grow a tomato in a container, that looks like this. And so I can do it repeatedly, but there's certain things that you need to know, and the basis of doing that is nutrition based on a sample like this. this would be considered to be average soil in Carson Valley. So we start at the very top. Over here on the left it says nutrient. So the very first nutrient says humus. That's H-U-M-U-S, okay? Now some of you, if you haven't heard me speak before, you'll get confused. And the confusion comes from this seeing a bean dip that's available at all the grocery stores now called hummus, okay? The difference is an M. If it has two M's, it's hummus, and it's something that you eat with a pita chip, okay? It's garbanzo beans, and you can get chili flavor and stuff. We have a little fun with you if you come in and order a truckload of hummus at Full Circle Compost, because we are in the humus business. Now, humus is essentially the end result of organic matter that has been broken down into its most basic elements. Okay? It is the basis of having a fertile soil. Organic matter is different than humus. Organic matter, if it's composted correctly, becomes humus. Mother Nature does that. It takes about 400 to 1,000 years to have organic matter turn into humus. She makes a lot of humus by having volcanoes happen, and you get heat and pressure that create coal, okay, and we burn coal for energy. The coal that is not the quality to burn for energy is a soft coal called leonardite, and out of that is where most of our humic acids and our humic soil substances come from. Heat and pressure creates this kind of a monoculture of humus. So, long story short, we look across there, we want to see a level of 30 to 40, and I see that this soil has 7. So its humus bank account is not huge, right? What that means is that if we go to the Sacramento Valley where they get a lot of rain and they're growing a lot of vegetables, the average humus level will tend to be somewhat higher if you're in an organic field, but if you're in a chemical field, it won't be as high. So we know we're low in humus. The next thing we see is nitrates. There's 70 pounds and you want to have 40 pounds, so there's an adequate amount of nitrogen in this soil. When you look at it, it's broken down into nitrate nitrogen and ammonia nitrogen. The ammonia is low at 4. Ammonia is what nitrogen's converted into. Next thing though, you look at it, phosphorus, 174 is what you want. You only have 94. Okay, so we're low in phosphorus, and over to the right you see this ratio. You see you want desired 1:1, and you have a 0.29 to 1. So you're only 25% of where you need your phosphorus level to be. The ratio between phosphorus and potassium is more important, actually, than the raw amounts. Now, when you look at the potassium, you need 167, you have 327. So guess what? You've got a high level of potassium and a low level of phosphorus, and you're trying to fix a ratio. Okay? So if you come in with just a straight, plain Jane cow manure, you're going to add more potassium than you are phosphorus. You're never going to add more potassium or more phosphorus than the potassium. And right now we need to get 3 times more phosphorus than potassium into this soil to balance the ratio. We all know about balanced bank accounts, right? Credit card's kind of that way. You got a credit card, that is a borrowing against theoretical money that you have in your bank, right? And at some point in time, if you don't make a deposit into that bank account for your credit card and you go to buy whatever it is you're buying, they tell you, gee, your credit card's been declined. So when we have Mr. Plant asking for some phosphorus in this soil and the ratio is whacked, meaning it's not at a 1:1 ratio, it swipes its debit card for some phosphorus, and guess what? Sorry, you're declined. So the plant doesn't get its phosphorus. Does that mean it dies overnight? No. It still keeps growing, but it's not correct as far as soil balance. So now we move down to the next element, which is the one that I really want to talk about, which is calcium. There you'd like to see a 7:1 ratio. You need 3,000 pounds, and we have a whopping 1,164. So what you'll notice when you look at the desired levels, the biggest number you see is calcium. There's 3,000 pounds. That's what you should have in a balanced soil. Now, most of you that are gardeners in your backyard, you've never done a soil test. For some of you that are our customers, we've done soil tests. When you do a soil analysis, send it to a lab that speaks the language of a plant, you learn something. You learn here that the biggest deficiency by weight and volume is what? Calcium. You got a 2,000 or a 21, what would it be, 2,200 pound basically shortage of calcium. Now, I got to ask about calcium and its role. Okay, soils are kind of boring, right? Some of you look like you're wishing you were somewhere else. So let's talk about calcium. What's its role? Okay, makes your teeth strong. I happen to be at the dentist. Again, I'm multitasking. After he wouldn't look in my ear, I decided I'd read while I work on my teeth. And they don't really like that because they get in my way to read. You know, so I have Reader's Digest, and I'm reading Reader's Digest. It's the June-July issue of Reader's Digest. You ought to all go get it. Kind of interesting because I just, slowed down enough, and I don't subscribe to Reader's Digest. Article, a study was done on a huge population, something like 10,000 men, and I think it was in Sweden, and it's talking about calcium. And they tracked these guys' life, and they found that if you got the recommended amount of calcium, which is 2,000 milligrams per day in your diet, you had a 25% increase in not dying. So in other words, of that population base that got 2,000 milligrams of calcium daily in their food, they had a 25% greater chance of living than dying. That's pretty big, right?
How do you get that much calcium in your diet daily?
There's a good question. Now you're starting to see what I'm talking about here, because guess what? It also went on to say that the calcium needs to come in your food, because your body recognizes food differently than a supplement. We don't think our bodies are very smart sometimes, but what actually happens is you take your Tums, because Tums is telling me I get all the calcium I want by taking Tums. Boy, I'm going to take Tums, or Pepto-Bismol, or kaopectate. It's all calcium-derived mineral, but it's in the mineral form. It's not in the plant form. And so the body says, guess what happens to it? You go, oh, and then you push the little lever and it goes away. So you're excreting most of it. So the point is we need it in our food. Guess what? We go across the United States. This is International Ag Labs. That means it's not just Nevada. I'm just an arm of them. They're all over the world. I had a chance to work with them in Mexico. We saw a similar situation in Mexico that this soil test is showing. We have a marked calcium deficiency along with phosphorus. Okay? So if it's not in the soil, guess what? It's not going to get in the plant. Now, plants are pretty cool. They have things in the root zone that work in their root zone called mycorrhizae. These are beneficial funguses that live there. They expand the root capacity of the plant. Their predominant function, mycorrhizae, is to acquire phosphorus for plants. So we can sit here and say, okay, we're in this nice park. This is Lampe Park. It's been here for how many years? Who knows? Do you know? 30-some years? 40? I'm looking at the trees. They look pretty nice. But then we look up on the mountains up here on your way up to Lake Tahoe, and you've got huge trees, huge trees. There's sprinklers here. There's a caretaker. There's an irrigation system. What do we got up on the mountain? Nothing. Man's not there, and the trees are bigger and better than these. So what's that tell me? It tells me something has to be different. That is a mycorrhizal environment because we're not in there tilling and we're not chemically fertilizing, and so the mycorrhizae barter with the plant and they say, Mr. Plant, I need some carbohydrates, you need some phosphorus, I'm going to go get you the phosphorus. They bring the phosphorus, the plant says, thank you very much, I'm going to give you some carbs. They get the carbs and everybody's happy. We come in and put chemical fertilizer on, we disallow that mycorrhizae to have anything to barter with. The plant says, heck with you. It's kind of like why you get divorced. You get tired of being symbiotic. You get tired of sharing, doing more for everybody else than you do for yourself. You become a taker and not a giver. That's not a good thing. We're at the Green Living Roundup because we want to be givers. We want to give back to Mother Nature more than we take. So we have to understand what we need to do. Back to our soil test. Calcium. It's not enough, so we got to add calcium. You look at magnesium, you need 429, there's 248. You're in a better balance, and your ratio is 4.7 to 1, so you're too low in the ratio. So the last thing I want to do in this soil right away is add magnesium, because the ratio is too low. I need to add more calcium, okay? The next thing we look at is sodium. You want to be less than 35, and there's 90 parts per million of sodium. Again, a reason why people ask me every day, can I just use horse manure? I got a horse that's pooping in my backyard. And I go, well, let's look at where the wild horses live. Is it the most beautiful, growing, lush environment? No. And so horse manure can be a soil amendment, but it's not necessarily the best amendment because that horse is eating and we are eating things that are deficient. And so our manures don't create those elements. Now, that's where chicken's different. Chickens manufacture calcium. So using chicken manure gives you more calcium. The problem is it also gives you more sodium. So guess what here? we got too much sodium to start with, so I go grab some manure and I put it on, and it doesn't work, even though it has calcium in it. Why? Because we've made our sodium level go even higher, and now we're trying to preserve our stuff instead of grow it. Does that make sense? Okay, so the rest of this stuff, that what you want to see here in this soil that I'll just share quickly, you look at these trace minerals. Now let's just look at pH, because everybody gets excited about that. 6.5 is where you want to be. This soil has a 7.1 pH. Almost all the pHs in California, Carson Valley are high. We look at our trace minerals: copper, iron, zinc, manganese, boron, sulfur. The formazine is those last two we haven't tested for on this test, but you got medium, high, low, low, and medium. So there's lots of iron in this soil, but essentially then you're deficient in copper, manganese, boron. So you need those. So now here's the thing about calcium, okay? I've got these little slices of tomatoes, and I have some toothpicks, okay? The toothpick is the transport mechanism for me to use to take this little piece of this one orange tomato and transport it from my cutting board to my mouth. Oh. Now, we talked about what it's okay to say on public radio, and I didn't get permission to ask about this, but I don't know if you could tell, but I just had a tomato gasm. It's this silent little thing that happens when you have an incredible flavorful tomato, and you eat it and you just kind of go, oh my God, that was good. You know? And it's a good thing, and we should have a lot of those, but we tend not to. The reason most kids don't like tomatoes is because they've never tasted a good tomato. Because to get a tomato to make it on a truck from Florida to Nevada, it's got to be tough as nails to get here. To come from my backyard, picked yesterday to get here, it's pretty easy. So, point being, this is the transport mechanism. Now, calcium is the transport mechanism in your soil. All minerals move around in the soil on the back of calcium. Imagine it as the transport truck. I got my booth here because I hooked my trailer up to a car and drug it here. Those of you that have gone to the restaurant lately, how do they get their food? It's all hauled there, right? So calcium is the trucker of all nutrients in the soil. In this soil test, you don't have a very strong truck. Now, guess what? Let's look at this soil test again. All trucks have to have a driver, right? I can have a truck, but without a driver, the truck's sitting there. Okay? You guys are looking like the truck's broken on these tomatoes because you all have that hungry look. You know? Well, I'm trying to make you understand the importance of calcium in the soil. Okay? We have a trucker here that's going to deliver these samples to you. She's standing right there. Okay? But she's now going to be like the driver. The driver of the calcium truck in soils is boron. And so I look at this soil test and it says that you want 0.8 to 1.2, and this has 1, so it's got medium boron. So we're okay in this case. But a lot of times people put calcium into the soil. Doesn't work. Why? Because they didn't look at boron. So calcium is the trucker and boron is the driver. We have to put both of those together, and then humus is the big buffer. It's the buffer that'll buffer the sodium level so that it isn't making it bad. So now remember, when you taste these, first you get we're going to think of this little toothpick as calcium, and it's going to allow you to sample any of these tomatoes that you'd like to sample, you know? Okay? So go ahead and pass the toothpicks out. Everybody can take a toothpick. And then, yeah, question?
I just wanted, did you ever see the article about the study that just came out this past week or so about the fact that it's probably better to drink milk than Gatorade?
Absolutely.
Because of the issue about calcium?
Absolutely, yeah. That's a perfect point. The point that was brought up is about the importance of drinking milk, because we went through this fat phobia thing, and all of a sudden milk is out. I was raised on a dairy farm, so I drank a lot of milk. I drank raw milk. Oh my God, should have died a long time ago. Drank it right out of the milk tank every single day. I didn't get calcium toxicity, and I don't have a deficiency of calcium because of the fact that we were able to drink our own milk. There are farmers that you wouldn't want to drink their milk raw. I drank my own milk because I'm my own farmer and I know my quality. That's why we like this event. We want to introduce you to local growers that are growing things locally, use local food. You know the grower. Do I know the grower at all the grocery stores? No, but a lot of the grocery stores are changing to where they introduce you. Rayleigh's, for example, introduces you to. They've got heirloom tomatoes there that are from Durst Farms. That grower is proud enough of his produce to put his name on it. Now, there's a lot of stuff that's sold that you might not want to know where it was grown. Okay? So now that you have your toothpicks, I'm going to let you all fill the role of calcium by just passing this around yourself. So I know there's not a lot of those black cherry tomatoes there, and that's a pretty intense one of those things we talked about earlier. So, you know, by the time it gets to you, it might be gone, but you can come to our booth, and then you can actually rate how those tomatoes test as far as what your preference is, because we're trying to figure out which ones are worth growing. Now I'm going to hand out one more piece of paper. So if there's not any major questions here, this soil test, there's a bunch more information, but you know, I don't want to bore you to death. This is an interesting handout here. Most of you will find that you're going to have a love relationship with a tomato called Sun Gold. Okay? Everybody says that. And in Reno, we did our taste test, and we had a Sun Gold hybrid that was sweeter than Sun Gold. So what I want to do is just let you guys take one of these and pass it back. This is a refractive index of crop juices. And I spaced out bringing along my refractometer. But a refractometer is a device that has, it looks like a little miniature binocular, like a binocular, only half of it, and it has a lens on it, and you take juice from whatever it is you're testing, you put it on the lens, you close this little cover, it spreads the juice out, and then the sun's light shines through it, and it refracts the light, breaks it down, and it gives you an index. The place that's most common to be seen is when you make wine. Everybody that's making wine tests their grapes with a refractometer to determine the sugar content to know when it is they want to harvest that grape. So things tend to sweeten as they mature. Grapes, when they're first there, our grapes up at the nursery are now quite sweet. They're getting sweeter. Hopefully they're not going to freeze before they get sweet enough. Same thing with the tomatoes. Genetics in the variety of the tomatoes changes things, but this is an interesting thing. I'm just passing it out because I'd like you to go home and look at it. There is a direct correlation between the sugar level and the level of nutrients, including calcium. The most direct correlation between sweetness and flavor in fruit is calcium related. Why? Because all the other nutrients that want to get into that plant that it wants come in as calcium driving the truck. And if there's no truck, those tomato slices could still be sitting here and you wouldn't have got to taste them. Does that make sense? Okay, so what you want to do is, if you want to find a refractometer, you can get on the internet, you can get one. If you want to have us show you how to do it at the nursery, you can come see us at the nursery. These are what Dr. Carrie Reams found were the levels of the bricks, is what you call it, the percent bricks that you should find. Dr. Reams was healing cancer with food in the 50s. Okay? Literally taking people that had terminal cancer, changing their diet, putting them on food that he was testing with a refractometer, and that's where he developed this index. I have gone to the grocery store, and the produce managers don't really like it because I was trying to find some apples. So we look on here, let's find apples. It's the top one. I was trying to find 18 bricks apples. I went to 4 grocery stores, and the best apple I found was an 8. Okay? Now, I have gone since to grocery stores, and I find apples that are up to 14. We found and searched Carson Valley, high and low, and finally, kind of by mistake, I found some 18 bricks apples. They were out in the ranchos, and these were apple trees that had been there. Nobody had been picking them for about 15 years. So every year what would happen is that apple tree would get fruit when it didn't freeze, drop it to the ground, and created this rich mulch. I had wished that it was one of my fine Full Circle Compost Soil Essence Elite customers, but I couldn't say that. I couldn't lie to you and say they weren't, so I was really sad about that. But what I learned is that this apple tree was feeding the soil itself. And they truly were incredible apples. You'd eat one apple and you'd be totally satisfied. you know. Whereas now, if you don't eat good food, you don't necessarily get satisfied. So this is more for your own edification. It's a very cool thing to study. The website for International Ag Labs is on here. Really good information. You'll find the REAMS information. What I would like to do now is that I'm going to ask a question. Anybody brave enough to answer the question, I'm going to give away this is a pepper that we grew. It's in a potting mix. What do I have to talk about here? Here we have a WeCycle poster. WeCycle is what we do. We're the recyclers in Carson Valley. We were the first permitted compost site in the valley. We are expanding our recycling efforts to work with local landscapers, providing them an alternative to go into the landfill with their green waste, and local restaurants. Embassy Suites is here. They are a fine establishment. Some of the best food I ever tasted. I tasted 2 weeks ago, I think. Chef Saul, was it? Oh my gosh. He made this salad that was, I can still remember that. I don't know if there's such a thing as a salad-gasm, but if there isn't, there should be. Because I think I had one. I mean, not only was it was pretty too, you know, and man, we kind of like that. We're kind of visual, you know. That salad was the prettiest darn salad I ever saw too. But the whole thing was, it was grown, the salad greens were grown by Hungry Mother Organics, a local grower, and you know, they grow good nutritional produce. So it's all about WeCycle. So we're also recycling with Costco now. So we're set up in our booth next to Costco. That's a cool thing. There's a lot of value in that. And the local landscapers, Jim Rowley's one of them. He brings the green waste to us from some of our customers, and then we turn that into part of this wonderful soil amendment called Soil Essence Elite. What we've done is, based on that soil sample, we put the phosphorus in, we put the calcium in, we put the elements that are missing and add it to our compost. So if that makes sense, what we're doing is we're taking calcium sources in solution grade and varied sources, calcium sulfate, calcium phosphate, and calcium carbonate, marrying those together, mixing it up in humus, not hummus. It is almost good enough to eat. You know, I don't know what my body would say and recognize it as if I ate it, but I have gotten a lot of it in through the fact the wind blows here, and we're out at the compost site, so I end up eating a lot of it. Do I look healthy? I'm losing my hair a little bit. No. Maybe a compost fat, you know. So anyway, the point is, I'm going to give this away. What is the instrument that you test your fruit with? What's it called, that instrument? Very good. This is called, the label says como. Como in Spanish means what? What? Or how? What? ¿Cómo está usted? What are you? No, it's like how are you? Okay, how or what? This was supposed to be corno, C-O-R-N-O. Some of our folks that work with us have reading problems. So this is a pepper. It's called Horn of the Bull. So this, you can just pass that back. If you take it home and you put it in a bigger pot, it'll be really happy. It'll live for a couple years. It'll give you those nice peppers. Okay, very good. Refractometer, that was nice. This is a Chamayo chili pepper. Now, we could take those tomatoes that are there. It's pretty amazing. I went to the high school environmental club, and I had tomatoes, and we hadn't sliced them up, and that was last year, you know, and I go, well, so who wants to taste tomato? Ew, I don't like tomatoes, you know. And so I just took my knife and I cut them up like that, and that's what happened. They were just, you know, it's like, you know, I mean, you'd think that you'd have to have candy to have people running around eating tomatoes like that. But if you grow them in balanced soil, they're like better than candy, right? Yay. I love it. So anyway, this is a Chamayo chili pepper. If you take those tomatoes and dice these up, and then you take this, would be garlic, and dice that up, guess what you have? Salsa! Yeah. So what's a good question? What's a question I should ask to give this pepper away?
Come on.
What is the nutrient in the soil that is known as the driver or the steering wheel of the calcium truck? Who said that? You got it. So you got a Chamayo chili pepper. Nice. All right. Is anybody having a problem with vampires? It's kind of the craze. Anybody having any problems? No? Here, how about that? Catch that. There you go. All right. You can take that, put it in your pocket. You break that apart, it'll grow. You can go ahead and plant it out. Would you like one? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go. Here, catch it. Very nice. Okay, now we're going to try it with this bag of compost. Let's see. Did you ever see Gallagher? I've always wanted to do that. Anyway, what's another question that we should ask? I'll give this bag of compost to anybody that wants to create a question that pertains to
What's the ratio of potassium and phosphate you want in your soil?
Oh, very good.
I already got a plant.
What is the... Here, you get a bag to go in your
1-to-1.
plant. There you go. You set that down there. So that's a good question. What is your phosphorus P to K ratio? What would you like it to be?
1-to-1.
1-to-1. That's right. Good answer. All right. Anybody else have any other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
It didn't say on your chart what the measurement ratio of the humus was. Is that pounds?
Okay. No, actually, that's a great question. Here you go. Your answer. This question.
We got lunch, but
There are several different humus tests. This particular test used by International Ag Labs is called the Lupke humus test. A guy named Sigvard Lupke, he's the guy that we learned how to compost from. What we do is we modify or create the most beneficial environment to allow the bacteria that work in the world of composting, they're the same ones in your backyard and in our compost pile. The better you do to create the positive environment, the better those little critters work for you. And that starts with recipe, number one. So if you just have poop, you're going to end up with poop. It'll be better than the poop you started with, but it's still poop. If you limit the poop in your recipe, you're going to have a better recipe. At the end of starting with recipe, then making sure there's lots of air, because most of the critters that make humus are aerobic critters. Okay? Then you have to have air, and then you got to manage the water, the moisture, keep that moisture perfect. You get a higher conversion, quicker to humus. And the way you test it with the Lupke humus test is you're looking for enzymes that are present when you have a plethora of beneficial biology. Does that answer the question? That test is actually taking soil, they make an extract of the soil, and then they look for enzymes that are present that bacteria give off.
it's almost like a parts per million then?
Yeah, so it comes, well, it's not even in parts per million. So if you get on the internet and you do a study or just look up Lupke humus test, you'll figure it out. It'll give you more things. Now, every test could be broken. You can take a straight sawdust, forest humus is what they call it. You got an old sawmill, let humus, let the sawdust age for forever. It'll show you a high test on the Lupke humus test. But because you know that it's just a pile of wood, you know it doesn't have the diversity as if you have, a more diverse recipe going into it. Okay? So, I think with that, any other questions? Yes?
What do you do if your sodium is really high, like on your test? Is there anything you can do?
Okay, good question. What do you do if the sodium's really high on your test? Lots of the soils in our area are high in sodium. Okay? And here's the interesting thing. Just because compost has sodium in it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Manure, on the other hand, has sodium in it. Manure's manure. It's raw. It's whatever critter made it. Okay? It is used a lot around here as fertilizer. Using raw manures, you have raw sodium. Using composted manures or compost that have a diverse recipe, you create more humus. Humus is the buffer to allow the plant not to be forced to take the sodium. Okay? So most of the toxicity issues with sodium are because of two things. One, not enough available calcium. And two, not enough humus. So if you can raise the humus level and raise the calcium level, you'll start to see the sodium levels go down. But there's also a third element that you need to be aware of, and that's sulfur. Sulfur creates an acidic environment in the soil, and it also loosens up the bonds on the sodium so that it'll leach out. So a good amendment, not necessarily by itself, it gets too technical for a lot of folks, is gypsum. But when we just use gypsum in our soils, you have to go to the base saturation test, and on that sample, if you look down at the bottom, it says CEC test. So this is a pretty thorough answer. Gypsum will work well in this soil because when we look at our CEC test, we go down here to where it says percents. K, Ca, Mg, and Na. So sodium is the Na, And when you come over here, you look and you want to be between 0.5 and 3%, and this soil's at 2.9. So it's at the high level of where you're going to see reduced production. Now, when we look at calcium, you want to be between 60 and 70, and you're at 70 in this soil. The problem with this soil is magnesium's too high. When magnesium's that high, it's going to get harder than a rock. Okay? That means your air and water isn't going to get in. So what we want to do in this soil is add gypsum to this soil because it's going to help release that. The reason gypsum will work is this number, the calcium percent number, is above 60. If you are not at 60% on your soil test, gypsum will never change the base saturation level. Okay? So once you get to 60%, gypsum works well. So guess what? Soil Essence Elite carries some gypsum with it, but it also carries the calcium carbonate with it, which is what you need to get to 60%. Okay? So it kind of depends where that is. Is that a good enough answer about what you do?
Yep.
Okay? I guess I could just say come see us. Sorry. Or what we're trying to do is make a mineral package, so if you're making compost in your backyard, you can get the mineral package from us. Because it is kind of a pain to go out and get like 25 different things. Just kind of like it's a rare opportunity to get to taste. Let's see, I personally brought 29 varieties here. People say you can't grow tomatoes in Carson Valley. Now I delivered 29 pretty tasty ripe varieties of tomatoes and grew them all in some not so good soil. But I used this soil amendment, used a 1/4 inch when I planted. I top dressed with a 1/4 inch when I took them out of the walls of water. That's after they froze on July 19th. So I gave them a little boost, said, I'm sorry you froze. And then I gave one more 1/4 inch. So 1/4 inch is not much. All right, this bag will cover a 4-foot square bed. So if you're into Mel Bartholomew and you're gardening in a square foot method, a 4-foot bed, this will cover 1/4 inch. So you'd need 4 bags to do a year. We don't use more than an inch in a year. I'm probably not going to do it again until I plant a cover crop in the areas when these tomatoes freeze. Okay, I should plant the cover crop now and let it start growing before the tomatoes freeze. Because otherwise we get the Indian summer I'm hoping for, then we'll, I won't be able to get a cover crop growing.
Well, that brings up, what do you cover crop?
What do I cover crop? I like to use things that grow year-round here, and the easiest one to use is a winter rye or a combination of rye, barley, and oats. The reason I like a winter oat is oats is the only plant that fixes phosphorus in the soil. And my soil is average. It's got different numbers, but I have this phosphorus deficiency. So we add soft rock phosphate, which is the organic form that the mycorrhizae like, okay, to our amendment. But then I can also plant some oats, and so all winter long while it's growing, it's fixing phosphorus in the soil. So I use a blend. And you can should be able to go to Hungry Mother Organics, same site that we're at, and pick up some cover crop seed. Yeah, you can also go online and get a nice cover crop from groworganic.com, which is Peaceful Valley Farm Supply. Those folks are over in Grass Valley. So, okay? Any other questions? If you haven't participated in the tomato tasting, make sure you do. Try to make sure you vote. It's a 1 to 10. It's not very sophisticated. I'm just rating it 1 to 10. If it's a dog, you put 1. If it's something else better, you put a higher number. I guess I shouldn't pick on dogs. Let me think here. Because I am being recorded, So the other thing is, go taste a few, then leave, and then come back and taste a few more, because sometimes one overshadows it. My suggestion, what I learned is stay away from the cherry tomatoes and taste the slicing tomatoes first, and then come back, like going to a wine tasting. They usually have you taste the reds first, because the cherry tomatoes kind of ruin your palate on the sweetness side of things. All right? Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's going.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Contact color.
No idea.
Okay, not a problem.
Hey, Vine, how's it going?
It's going very good.
Good. Welcome to Scott out of Tahoe. Tell everyone what we're doing here.
Jumping out of a plane today.
Out of this airplane.
Yes, ma'am.
With that guy.
Yay! Uh-oh. Is it trustworthy?
Yeah. So why are we doing this today?
Oh, it's gonna be a good time.
Yeah?
like the low. Not like the loud.
Oh yeah, here.